So I posted a video the other week discussing the difference between training age and effective training age in regards to hypertrophy training, and I wanted to make a follow-up video because I feel like I left out a couple of important points. As a quick refresher, training age is how long you've been training on paper. So if you've been lifting consistently for 5 years, that's your training age, 5 years. Effective training age represents how long you've actually been training productively. So in the context of hypertrophy, this is how long you've been training productively for the goal of muscle growth. This is a much better way to determine how much muscle you have left to build. In the last video, I mentioned some reasons why your effective training age for hypertrophy might not line up with your training age. Poor programming, meme technique, lack of intensity, bad diet and recovery, stuff like that. These all essentially implied that mistakes were being made. But I left out something that has nothing to do with making mistakes, so let me address this. Productive training is going to look different depending on your goals, so if your goals in the gym shift, your effective training age shifts too. If you train for strongman, CrossFit, powerlifting, or Olympic weightlifting, and you transition to a hypertrophy focus, your effective training age with respect to hypertrophy is going to be lower than your previous effective training age for that other area. A lot of people don't understand this. Here's an obvious example. Productive training for an Olympic weightlifter is going to look different from productive training for a bodybuilder. A weightlifter might spend 15 years improving their snatch and clean and jerk, and they might be at a point where they're grinding day in and day out for an entire year just to put on a couple kilos to their total. From an Olympic weightlifting perspective, this lifter is advanced. Now, from a hypertrophy standpoint, this lifter is almost certainly not advanced. The lower body might be, you gotta love a nice set of Olympic weightlifting quads, but biceps, triceps, delts, chest, lats, all these muscle groups probably all have a ton of room for growth. Now, things get a little murkier when you're talking about powerlifting and hypertrophy training. Dedicated hypertrophy work is usually included in a typical powerlifting program, and a lot of bodybuilders incorporate squatting, benching, and deadlifting in their routines. There is some overlap, but there is a difference between the two training styles, and that is because the end goals are different. Training to maximize your 1 rep max on squat, bench, and deadlift will look different than training to build as much muscle mass as possible. To see this from a results perspective, you can look at top natural powerlifters and compare their physiques to top natural bodybuilders. Powerlifters can certainly be very jacked, but in the aggregate, the top bodybuilders are going to be more jacked than the top powerlifters. In the aggregate is an important phrase here because, of course, there are outliers. I've personally seen people who trained strictly for powerlifting for 5 to 7 years, and when they switch to hypertrophy focus, they blow up in a couple years. This happens all the time, and I don't want to get into the differences between strength and hypertrophy training in this video, but my main point here is just to show that how you train matters, and this is something to consider when thinking about your effective training age. You don't just keep getting bigger over time as long as you're lifting in some capacity. Now, I kind of touched on the Natty limit in my last video, right? People think they have no room for growth just because they've been training for a certain amount of time, but all they're taking into consideration is their training age, not effective training age. This issue is compounded when you hear people, experts in particular, start throwing out time frames for reaching or getting close to the Natty limit, in some cases as low as 3 to 5 years. Now, this is too low in my opinion. Most high-level natural bodybuilders would laugh in your face if you were training for 3 to 5 years and claimed to hit your genetic limit, even if those training years are maximized. But let's assume this is an accurate estimate when referring to effective training age. Even if it is 3 to 5 years, almost nobody actually trains productively from day one, and most people don't even know what productive training looks like. All you have to do to see this is go into any commercial gym and take a look around. When you're on social media, you sort of assume everyone knows what they're doing, but out in the real world, this is definitely not the case. So I get stressed out when I hear something like 3 to 5 years because I know young lifters who have been training for that amount of time are going to hear this and get discouraged, thinking their gains have tapped out. I know this because I was in a similar boat around 5 years into lifting. I plateaued and I started watching a lot of Natty or Nots and basically convinced myself that training for hypertrophy was pointless as a natural. At this time, I didn't even do direct arm work. My lower body training sucked. I wasn't eating carbs, and I was working out, fasted at 6 a.m. before work every day. I then abandoned the idea of training for size, and my training became very minimalistic. Eventually, I did dial back in, and I came to realize that I had a lot more gains in the tank. But anyways, here's my advice to you. Don't even start to think about your natty limit until you're near that 10-year mark. And even at that point, you really need to question how productive your training has been over that time frame. Most people are not honest with themselves in this regard. I certainly wasn't. But chances are you're not as advanced as you think you are, especially if you've never done 40 sets for a muscle group in a week.
20, 30, even 40 working sets.
I've never seen his brachiality.
8+ reps was it.
A blue lobster is a rare, like it only happens 1 in 2 million.
Gatorade, take a month off of training.
Jiu-jitsu.
Once a year.
Sorry, I just wanted to fit that in some way. I'll probably be retiring that meme soon. Anyways, that is all. Check out my free training resources linked below. I also just released a longer video sharing a couple of free bodybuilding programs. They come with detailed files so you can track your progress, and I include guidance on things like substitutions, intensity, volume, and progression. In the next week or so, I'm going to put out the updated spreadsheet I use to track my training. I'll also be starting up the top 50 most jacked linebackers in NFL history series very soon. You can check out the trailer to that series below. Anyways, see you later.